I'll be speaking to a veteran, not of the military, but of the great civil rights movement of the 1960s. 60 years ago, Liz Aaronsohn, a white woman, now a retired professor from Central Connecticut State University, went down to Mississippi with scores of others to expose conditions there. Good afternoon.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Before we start, I understand you have a shirt you'd like to display to us.
Yes, yes.
Stand up and then tell us.
Uh-huh. Can you see it?
Yep, we can see it. I'll read it to
Visible?
the people who may be listening to this. 40, 1964 to 2004, 40th anniversary Union, Freedom, Summer, and is there more on it?
Not Union, just
40th
40th
anniversary
anniversary
of Freedom, Summer.
from
All
Summer,
right, there you
Sunflower County, Mississippi, August 5 to 7. That was 2004. That was the 40th anniversary.
Great.
Great.
Okay, so you went down to Mississippi during that Freedom Summer. That was the name of the
Hmm.
campaign.
Yes.
So, especially for younger people, what rights did blacks have and not have in the South in those days?
What did they have and not have? Mostly they did not have. They'd come up from slavery only to be sharecroppers. They had no civil rights. They could not vote. And part of our project was to help them register to vote because the Voting Rights Act hadn't been passed yet. In fact, because of our movement, Lyndon Johnson did pass the 65 Voting Rights Act, but there was no voting rights. So our job partly was to do education and encouragement so that people would register to vote and accompaniment. We accompanied them to the courthouses so that they could register to vote. And the registrars of voters put every obstacle in their way for voting. So, and the main reason why voting was such a huge issue was because if you're not on the voter registration rolls, you won't be called up for jury duty.
Ah,
So juries were all white at that time. So if a black person was called to court and was indicted and about to be convicted, it would be by an all-white jury. So
got it.
we wanted, yeah, we knew. Well, it wasn't me. I didn't initiate it. I was definitely a participant who learned. It was like the most important learning of my lifetime, more than my college and more than my graduate school.
Mm. All right, so let's go back. So you're a white woman. When did you first get interested in civil rights?
Well, I'm a Jewish woman also. My father, who was a rabbi, taught me justice, justice shalt thou do. And I've been involved in justice activism ever since I was a teenager, I suppose. And I did active um, anti-war actions in graduate school, college and graduate school, and in my first teaching job. So it's part of me, part of growing up, part of knowing what it meant to be a Jewish woman.
So in 1963, that's when the amazing march in Washington. I know you weren't part of that, but where
Well,
were you?
I was part of it because I didn't go to DC
Right.
because I was in Seattle, Washington at that time. So the group I was working with, Seattle Core, organized a companion march, a sympathy march, and we marched through the city of Seattle um, to be a kind of parallel march with the March on Washington.
Do you remember much about it? What the slogans were or how
I
many
don't,
people?
I
Yeah.
don't, I can't, but it was lively. I remember it was lively.
Okay. Well, let me go back even further. So where did you go to school? You mentioned school.
Yeah. I went to high school in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, of course, J.D. Vance's state. Um, I went to college at Smith on a quota for Jewish people. There were only so many Jews allowed to be there.
Wow.
And yeah, so I was admitted to Smith College on a scholarship and work study and all of that business. And I was part of Hillel, but I became, as a senior, I became president of the Interfaith Association. And one of the activities of the Interfaith Association, the minister, the chaplain, the school chaplain at that time, suggested that this was 1957, and just before that had been the Montgomery bus boycott.
Mm.
And he suggested that we bring to Smith people from the Montgomery bus boycott. And that was instrumental for me to understand what was going on. And they talked about, my feet is tired, but my soul is resting.
Mm-hmm.
So that was quite impressive for me.
And we should point out Smith College was not down in the South. It was in the enlightened state of
Massachusetts. Hopefully enlightened. Yeah.
And
Mostly,
then you went to grad school. Where did you go?
I did a year at Yale, got a Master of Arts in Teaching, and I was part of a group of students. I was one of very few women at Yale at that time, but it was mostly young men. And we started a group called Challenge. Let's see, a student program at Yale University to confront with realistic concern and responsible action the crucial issues of today's world. Boy,
Wow.
I remember that.
Remember all that? That's
Yeah,
great.
I remember it because it's scanned in iambic pentameter, and I'm an English major.
All right. And then you became a school teacher?
Became a school teacher in Evanston, Illinois, a high school English teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and an anti-war activist, a peace activist at that time, we called it, peace activist.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember a march from Great Lakes Naval Training Center all the way down to the Loop, which I couldn't do now if my life depended on it. But I think it was several miles, many miles. I did that one, and of course, other actions. So
Now, I'm sorry.
that's all.
Now, there was a group or an institution called the Peace Corps that was President John F. Kennedy's showpiece. I understand you were interested in that. How
Yeah,
did it appeal to you, and why did you join it?
yeah. I I can't remember exactly why I left Evanston. I do know that the students, um, the curriculum that I chose to teach Huckleberry Finn. Um, I chose to teach Cry the Beloved Country. Who wrote that?
Alan Patton,
Probably, yeah.
something like that.
Yeah. So it was supposed to be three honors, three, three English honors, three English honors, but the kids called it three Negro honors because I had all these readings
Uh-huh.
about inequality. I was very aware of inequality by that time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
So,
didn't get fired there. I didn't get fired.
all right. But you joined the Peace Corps, but things didn't go exactly as planned.
No, because I was outspoken.
Uh-huh.
My father raised me to be outspoken, and I was, and I didn't just shut up.
You trained to go to Ethiopia?
Ethiopia, and I learned Amharic. I can't speak a word of it now. Maybe I can. Tena Istalin. Ha, yeah, memory does memory. I think that means hello. Um,
But you didn't go to
So,
Ethiopia.
no, because the powers that be decided, they observed me. There was surveillance at that time. Well, the Peace Corps was an arm of the CIA. We knew that even then in 1950, 1960, whatever it was. Can't remember. So I joined the Peace Corps, though I didn't know at that time that it was an arm of the CIA because I, I wanted to help the world, of course, right? I was 22 years old, 24.
Yeah.
I was going to make a big change in the world. But I was outspoken and I played guitar and sang protest songs. Yeah, I was too visible.
And
So
you heard
when they,
about this thing called Vietnam, I understand.
oh God, yes. I heard about Vietnam and I was protesting the war in Vietnam. It was other volunteers who informed me that we were involved in Vietnam. I didn't know. And then I knew.
Yeah.
So once I knew, I had to protest it. So the people who came from DC to decide whether people would go or not, um, the psychiatrist who interviewed me said, maybe it's the way you wear your hair. So I didn't go. But in the meantime, I had met a young man, and on impulse, we decided to get married.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and for him, it was because he had joined the Peace Corps. It was probably he who informed me about the war, but he wanted to be in the Peace Corps to avoid having to go to Vietnam,
Uh-huh.
having to be drafted. And then when I got selected out, it was, oh my God, he's going to be selected out too, and he'll have to go to Vietnam. So he talked our way. I suppose he became a lawyer after that. I don't know. He talked our way into a second project, which took us out to Seattle, Washington, to go to Thailand.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say, Dichan yak chanet nam hai kun rucha kun kang Dichan. And
Wow.
that means I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. Why do I remember that? I don't know. But they selected me, not us, but selected me out of that one.
Uh-huh.
And they said, you shouldn't have been put in the second project to begin with.
So you're in
So,
Seattle, and I'm sorry if you were going to add a few more details.
yeah. So he got himself a job, and I got myself a job as a teacher, not a professor, a teacher at the University of Washington. And I
Uh-huh.
taught English literature and composition. And that was 63. That was when Kennedy was murdered.
Uh-huh.
I had been teaching that day and I was in the hallway and the news came. And that's how I knew that the shots came from the grassy knoll. So I've been a rebel ever since, or since then, no, since way before then.
So here we're close to 64. You're in Seattle, and you're interested in the Freedom Summer Project. And
Yeah.
who are the groups behind that project?
Freedom Summer Project. Well, I read about it and I was ready to leave the marriage. It was not a good marriage at all. So the groups were SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee,
Mm-hmm.
and CORE, Council on Racial Equality, and the NAACP. And together, the groups formed an organization called COFO, Council of Federated Organizations. And that was the sponsor. So I got on a bus and I guess I went home to Cincinnati. And from Cincinnati, I went on down to Miami of Ohio, which is where the training was.
Miami, we have to stress this is Ohio, this is not Florida.
No, 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 not Florida. Miami, Ohio. Yeah.
Can you remember things about the training? Was it all
Oh, the training.
nonviolence?
It was about a lot of it about nonviolence, and the SNCC workers taught us how to protect ourselves and each other, and that if the person we were with is about to be hit, we throw our bodies over that person so that we take those blows. It was very much about nonviolence and direct action like that. It wasn't about sitting in or marching or anything, but it was that kind of nonviolence. Well, that was one of the things, and then, excuse me, a lot about African and African American history that I had never known.
Right.
And the Freedom School curriculum, which had been written by several SNCC workers, including Charlie Cobb, who I think is still alive, actually, and Stoughton Lynd, who passed at 91 a couple of years ago. The curriculum included Langston Hughes and Milton Metzger's book, what was it called? Pictorial History of the Negro in America.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the books that we used. And I learned as much as my students learned from it.
Yeah. And Bob Moses was there?
Oh, yeah. Bob was kind of in charge of the whole training and the whole project. Didn't want to be called the leader, but he was.
Yeah. And I mean, I was very young in those days, but even I heard the name Bob Moses and what was going on, and very impressive man.
Very, very impressive. The thing I remember the most about Bob was he passed at 86 several years ago. As if he said, I don't ask you to do anything that I won't do myself. And he put his life on the line so many times. He was arrested so frequently, but always nonviolent.
Yeah.
And made that clear to us, and always respectful of the local people. And he drummed that into the volunteers, that we are there to serve the local people. We are not there to fix them. Even in Freedom School, we're there to serve them. So that was what we did.
So you went to Mississippi, and how did you and your fellow activists get there?
Oh, there were cars. I can't remember whose car I drove down in, but if it was an integrated car that is black and white, the white people had to lie down in the back seat when we crossed the border into Mississippi. Yeah. Yeah, that was Mississippi. It was a police state. Well, we were invited there as white volunteers. We were invited to break the terror that the Black people in Mississippi had been enduring for maybe a century or maybe 400 years.
Yeah.
So we were there to break the terror by being white people. One of the people was the son of a congressman from California, Len Edwards. Len was in the same project I was in, Sunflower County. And of course, his father being a congressman, if Len was in danger, then the whole country knew about it. And that was the idea, that if white people are in danger, the country will learn about what's going on in Mississippi. That was the goal. So we were there on purpose, and we knew it, to break the terror.
Where did you go in Mississippi first?
Yeah, to Mrs. Hamer's house, actually, to Mrs. Hamer's town, Ruleville. And I stayed at her house. I don't know how long, a few weeks, I suppose. I don't know. And then later,
book, I'm sorry.
No, later in the summer, we opened a new project in Indianola. I wasn't the project director. The project directors were all Black people, some from the north and some from the south.
So you say Mrs. Hamer, and we can see over your shoulder a poster of,
yes, there she is.
It says Fannie Lou Hamer, but when I was constructing questions with you, you made an interesting remark about using the word Mrs. What was that about?
Oh, that was so important because one of the rights that Black people didn't have was to be called by Mr. or Mrs. White people called Black men boy and always by their first name, and Black women by their first name. Never Mrs. Hamer, never Mr. Hamer. So that was an important aspect of what we did, we practiced, and we modeled, hopefully.
And
Yes.
and what
Mrs.
was your job down in Rulesville?
Ruleville, and then in Genoa. Freedom School teaching, which was not stand up and lecture by any means. It was discussion. It was asking the students, who were mostly teenagers, about their lives and making sense of what it was they were experiencing and what their parents and grandparents and ancestors had experienced. And it was mostly discussion. It was, for most of those kids, it was the first time they had ever spoken to a white person directly, to look at face to face a white person. So just being there as a white person, treating them with respect was part of it. And that was our goal. So that's what we did. And we used that curriculum from which I learned so much. And I remember one student asked a question, why does the earth need the earthworm? We pondered that for a while. Yeah, so
That's cute.
yeah, we did a lot.
So tell us about Mrs. Sorry,
Mrs. Hamer.
Mrs. Hamer. Okay, what was she like?
Well, Mrs. Hamer, you can read her biography and know how she came up as a sharecropper and wasn't allowed to speak out and wasn't allowed to be political. And then SNCC workers came along. And essentially, it was kind of like Juneteenth. They informed the people of their rights.
Mhm.
When Bob went there in 61, that was way before 64, but Bob and others went in 61. They began to work with the NAACP to help inform Black people of their rights. And Mrs. Hamer, oh, she ate that up. She just said, that's what I want to do. So she was fired from her job as, I can't remember what her job was on the plantation. Fired, so she had to move. She and her husband had to move off the plantation. So they moved to a little house in Ruleville, which is where I stayed with her for a little while. She was dynamite. She's known for her singing. She would always sing in tough situations. This Little Light of Mine is her favorite song. But apparently on a bus coming from a voter registration workshop, I think some officers boarded the bus and she started singing, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Around. That was Miss Hamer.
So for the history books that write about this, and with I hope they'll still be in the schools in the year.
Oh, God.
But they talk about what happened at the Democratic Convention in Atlantic City, New Jersey, in 1964. Can you talk about?
No, 1964.
I thought I said that. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, 1964. So at the end of Freedom Summer, a bunch of people in court, including both Black and white, Bob Moses, Reverend King, what was his first name? Can't remember. But some Black, some white, Miss Hamer, other people, went up to Atlantic City as part of the Freedom Democratic Party. So part of what we did, although I wasn't involved in that part of Freedom Summer, what we did was we created the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And we held an election and people could vote. Black people could vote, which they were not allowed to in the white elections. They had no say.
Mm.
So the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party elected members went to Atlantic City to claim their right to sit in the seats of the Mississippi delegation. And oh my, yeah, lawyer Joe Rao betrayed us.
In what
He,
way? There was
yeah,
negotiations, deals?
they tried to make a deal, and he talked to Ms. Hamer and a few other people on the delegation and offered, okay, you can have 2 seats and the white people can have the rest of them. And Ms. Hamer said, we didn't come here for no 2 seats.
Mm-hmm.
So our delegation, I say our because it was part of the same project, but our delegation said, no way, we're not doing it.
And it exposed a lot of the racism of the Democratic Party and
Sure.
perhaps had a bunch to do with LBJ going for voting rights the next year.
Yes. Yes, that was what it was. Ms. Hamer stood up. Actually, Ms. Hamer spoke at the convention. That was when she said, famously, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah, yeah.
She called herself, I'm Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer of Rulesville, Mississippi. Yeah.
And I read that in an effort to make that part of the convention get less attention, LBJ had a surprise press conference,
Indeed. Yeah. He
but it
jumped in.
actually boomeranged on him.
Yep. Ultimately.
In
Yeah.
that some of the networks put her whole talk right on.
Afterwards. They did afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
amazing.
this, you can YouTube her speech also.
We'll try to link to that.
Yeah.
Now you didn't go to Atlantic City. You
No,
studied.
no, I wasn't involved in the voter registration part of it, so I just heard about the trip
Mhm.
to Atlantic City, but I didn't go because I wasn't part of the delegation.
Did a lot of blacks get registered during that Freedom Summer?
An incredible number, yes. It was very successful, and got registered as Freedom Democrats. Now going down to the courthouse and getting registered was something very, very, very different. I mean, you would get fired from your job, your house might be bombed. I mean, it was very dangerous to go down to the courthouse. But we did accompaniment with them if they were ready to go.
Mm.
And we go before the registrar, and he says, okay, you have to take this test, this literacy test, which white people didn't have to take.
Ah.
And you have to tell me how many bubbles are there in a bar of soap. Yeah,
Say that again.
yeah.
How
You
many?
how many bubbles in a bar of soap? Yeah.
What's the right answer? I haven't.
He's the only one who knows, that registrar, voter registrar.
But somehow people were registered.
Somehow a few got registered, a few, not many.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of people were arrested.
Mhm, mhm.
A lot of people went to jail. Um, but the movement was ready for that.
What about racist attacks in Mississippi?
On us, on the volunteers,
Well, any aspect of it.
oh, well, racist attacks were happening all the time on the black people.
Yeah.
That was what we went south to call attention to and try to do something about by our presence as white people with family back in the North or wherever. I remember actually, I was in Jackson and at the high holidays, because I stayed on after Freedom Summer. It was the Jewish high holidays, and I thought I might go to synagogue.
Uh-huh.
Well, I found out that Jews in Mississippi are white people.
Uh-huh.
No way are they going to have me at their synagogue.
They knew about you.
Oh, they knew about us big
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
We were a danger to the peacefulness of Mississippi. We were doing just fine till the outside agitators came in.
Yeah.
That was us.
Yeah, that term, outside agitators, I certainly remember that from those days, and I think they're using it again.
Now they're deporting the outside agitators.
Were there any violence against the volunteers? The
Well, you may remember that Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney were murdered in 64, just before our group went down.
Wow.
Yeah, just before we had just sent them off in their car from Oxford. It was Oxford, Ohio. Did I say that? I said
No.
Miami. No, it was Oxford, not
Uh-huh.
Miami. It was Oxford, Ohio. Okay.
You say we had sent them off. You knew them?
Well, we all knew everybody because the group that they had trained with knew them, but
Uh-huh.
I didn't know them well.
Yeah.
But we gathered around to to say goodbye, and they went off to Mississippi, and they what as soon as they got there, they learned about a burned church in Meridian, Mississippi, near Philadelphia, Mississippi,
Mhm.
and it was in Philadelphia near Meridian, and they went to inspect it, and the Ku Klux Klan ambushed them and burned their car and beat them up and shot them and buried them in what they call an earthen dam. And the FBI couldn't find them for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And finally, when they did, it was big news in the
Yeah.
US because it was James Chaney, who was a Black Mississippi young man. And then there was Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman, white New Yorkers.
Mm, mm.
And that made lots of news. They were murdered brutally.
Wow. Now, at the end of the summer, you already mentioned you didn't go back north. You stayed on. Who
Yeah,
convinced you to do that?
nobody convinced me. I I felt like this is where I belonged. Um,
But did the project decide to go on
oh,
instead
the
of just,
project was planning to go on, not the summer project, but the the individual projects, freedom schools and voter registration, all of that. But most of the college students went back to school,
Mhm.
but so we were operating on smaller staffs.
And
I
and
stayed on.
you mentioned the name Stoughton Lynd when we were preparing this.
Yeah,
What role did that famous?
yeah, Stoughton. I don't know if people know of Stoughton. He was quite a pacifist, and he worked for a long time with Dave Dellinger, um, and Bob Moses, uh, to end the war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And Stoughton was kind of head of the freedom schools, and he had to go back to his teaching job at Yale at the end of the summer. So he asked Ralph Featherstone and me to run the freedom schools because Ralph was staying also. So we did. And running the freedom schools meant making phone calls to raise money and getting materials and driving all around the state to distribute the materials to freedom schools in projects around the state. That's what the job was.
Were any of the schools threatened or harmed?
I'm sure they were. I can't remember. Oh, well, gosh. In Denola, where I was based, they threatened to bomb the freedom school. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they actually did. I can't remember because I think I was in Jackson by that time. Yeah. I had moved to Jackson and then I heard about it, that they were going to bomb my school.
And
And
then
I
you,
remember,
I'm sorry.
I remember Bob and Donna Moses looking at me like, yeah, you're making so much out of your school getting bombed. What about all of them? it was a learning experience for me, Stan.
I bet. And you went to a small town named Sidon, I
Side,
understand.
yeah. After I left Jackson, I went to live in the Mississippi Delta and just live in the community and work with the people there. And by then, we had already tried to organize the Mississippi Freedom Labor Union.
Uh-huh.
I was working with sharecroppers. And at this 40th reunion, I remember I went to Sidon 40 years later, and some of those guys remembered me.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. It was because maybe I was such a kook or something. I don't know.
Well,
But,
you're very memorable.
well, a civil rights worker had come to town and shook up the Klan. I mean, it's kind of like Mamdani's win in New York. What a ruckus it called. What caused? Wait a minute. That's not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to have a Muslim, dark-skinned Muslim,
Mhm.
win the Democratic primary.
And so you leave Mississippi. What year do you leave?
Well, I guess it was 66.
Hmm.
And I got on a bus and went to New York City because I knew I could get a teaching job because um, they might not bother the fact that I had an FBI file, right? A big city. So I did that. And I was teaching at Brandeis High School in New York City.
But before we get into
Yeah.
that, in the run-up to this interview, you mentioned you left in part because of the politics that was going on, the
Oh,
new
yeah.
Black Power. Could you explain that?
Yeah. By 66, it was already clear that white people should go and organize in their own towns, organize their own people
Hmm.
to be supporters. That the Black people in Mississippi didn't need us anymore. So that was made clear. And it wasn't just Black Power, and it was, I mean, we knew that if if the violence were to come, we would be swept along and injured and maybe killed, just like the Black people. But they wanted to run their own thing. They were done with us. We had done what we meant to do, and it was time for us to go back and organize in our own communities. So I did that.
This has
66.
been fascinating. Hopefully we can do a part two where you can talk about your work up north for civil rights, your years as a professor, and your work for Palestine.
Definitely.
Thanks for speaking with me.
You're very welcome, Stanley.